The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Sycamore Lane as Eleanor clutched the small, floral-patterned handbag her dear departed husband Arthur had gifted her on their silver anniversary. Her 72nd birthday, she mused, a milestone she'd envisioned celebrating with a quiet lunch at the Willow Creek Bistro, a place that held so many sweet memories. She'd even taken extra care with her appearance, donning her favorite lavender cardigan, the one that always brought out the blue in her eyes, and carefully styling her silver hair into soft waves. But the familiar route to town never materialized. Instead, her only son, Michael, guided their sturdy sedan down a long, winding driveway, flanked by ancient oak trees, their leaves ablaze in the fiery hues of autumn. A sense of unease, a cold knot in the pit of her stomach, began to tighten its grip. The car finally halted before a grand, albeit somewhat imposing, building with a weathered sign that read, Oakwood Assisted Living Residences. "Michael, dear," Eleanor began, her voice trembling slightly. "This isn't the bistro, is it?" Michael cleared his throat, avoiding her gaze as he fiddled with the car keys in the ignition. "Mom," he started, his tone overly gentle, a tone that always set her teeth on edge. "We need to have a little chat." A wave of icy dread washed over Eleanor. This wasn't right. Not at all. "Chat about what, darling?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even, though a tremor betrayed her forced composure. He finally turned to face her, his brow furrowed in what she recognized as a practiced expression of concern. "It's just, well, living alone isn't safe for you anymore, Mom. With your little memory lapses." "Memory lapses?" Eleanor retorted, a sharp edge creeping into her voice. "What on earth are you talking about, Michael?" She might misplace her reading glasses now and then, or momentarily forget where she'd put the TV remote, but her mind was still sharp as a tack. "Thank you very much." He continued as if she hadn't spoken, his words flowing smoothly, rehearsed. "I found a lovely place for you, Mom. It's safe, comfortable, and you'll have people your own age, plenty of activities to keep you busy." A bitter laugh escaped Eleanor's lips, a sound that held no amusement whatsoever. "Are you having me on, Michael? You've brought me here. On my birthday?" Michael stepped out of the car. "Come on, Mom. Let's just go inside and take a look." Eleanor remained rooted to her seat, her hands gripping her handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. "I'm not moving, Michael." That's when he opened the trunk. Nestled amongst a jumble of his golf clubs and a spare tire was her small, worn suitcase, the one she usually used for weekend trips to visit her sister in upstate New York. Her breath hitched. He'd gone through her things. Michael sighed, a long, weary sound that suggested he was the one enduring some great hardship. "Please, Mom. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Reluctantly, her heart heavy as a stone, Eleanor allowed him to guide her into the building. The air inside was thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic mingled with the faint, cloying aroma of overcooked vegetables. A cheerful receptionist with a brightly colored brooch offered a strained smile. Michael was soon engaged in hushed conversation, exchanging papers, legal papers. Eleanor realized with a sickening lurch, a transfer of power of attorney. Her name. His signature. Done. Just like that. The sting of tears pricked at her eyelids, but she wouldn't let them fall. Not yet. She would maintain some semblance of dignity in this bewildering, hurtful moment. A young aide with kind eyes led her down a quiet corridor to a small room. Beige walls. An adjustable hospital bed draped in a thin, pale green blanket. A small window offered a view of a stark brick wall. Her birthday gift. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, still clutching her coat, a chill seeping into her bones that had nothing to do with the autumn air. No cake. No candles. Just a profound, echoing silence. Hours drifted by, each one a heavy weight in the stillness. Finally, she reached for the small bouquet of carnations Michael had presented her with a perfunctory, "Happy birthday." They were already wilting, the vibrant colors dulled, mirroring the way she felt inside, faded and forlorn. That night, sleep offered little solace. The unfamiliar mattress felt hard and unforgiving. The sheets smelled faintly of bleach. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant murmur of the night staff, amplified the suffocating sense of being utterly alone. Her mind raced, replaying conversations with Michael over the past year, searching for the subtle signs she'd so blindly missed. The increasing phone calls asking for just a little help with this or that urgent expense. The vague explanations about work pressures and marital tiffs. The way he'd always been so quick to accept her offers of assistance, never quite paying back the loans. She thought of all the times she'd said yes when a firm no was what was truly needed. The time she'd covered for his shortcomings, smoothed things over, swallowed her own disappointments because he was her son, her only child, and a mother's love, they always said, was unconditional. But that night, something shifted within Eleanor. The unwavering shield of maternal devotion, the instinct to always defend and protect, finally cracked. A deep, visceral sense of betrayal settled in its place. The following morning, the bland institutional breakfast sat heavy in her stomach, each bite a reminder of her current reality. She asked a nurse, a kindly woman named Sarah with a warm smile, for her mobile phone. "Oh dear," Sarah said gently, her smile faltering slightly. "Your son took care of that." Had the line disconnected. Said it would be too confusing for you. A cold, stark realization pierced through Eleanor's stunned disbelief. She wasn't here to be cared for. She was here to be erased, stripped of her connections to the outside world, isolated and dependent. And if she didn't find a way out, they would succeed. But Eleanor wasn't as fragile as they thought. Not by a long shot. A quiet resolve began to simmer beneath the surface of her hurt and anger. She might be 72, but she was far from finished. For 2 days, she found herself unable to eat, not as a deliberate act of defiance, but because the bland, tasteless food seemed to embody the very truth she couldn't stomach. There was something profoundly dehumanizing about being treated as if your life, your experiences, your very essence, no longer held any value. She'd raised a child, built a home filled with love and laughter with Arthur, volunteered countless hours at the local library, and now she was simply Room 3B, a name on a chart. The nurses were mostly well-meaning, offering platitudes and calling her sweetheart and dear, as if she were a child or a doddering old fool. No one asked about her life before Oakwood. No one inquired about her passion for gardening, her love of classic literature, the intricate quilts she used to create. To them, she was just another elderly resident in slippers, prone to forgetting things. Even though her memory, she knew with unwavering certainty, was perfectly intact. Her roommate, Agnes, a woman with kind eyes but a weary spirit, spent most of the day dozing in her armchair and the nights punctuated by soft snores. She rarely spoke, but when she did, it was often about family members who hadn't visited in years, their absence a palpable ache in the quiet room. Eleanor listened, understanding that particular brand of loneliness all too well. Determined to keep her mind active, Eleanor spent her days in the communal lounge, watching the news with the volume turned low and tackling the daily crossword puzzles left on a side table. She reread a well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, a comfort in its familiar prose, but a growing sense of despair, a heavy weight in her chest, threatened to pull her under. Then, on the 4th day, a small flicker of hope ignited in the dimness. A young nurse named Chloe, with bright, inquisitive eyes and a cascade of auburn braids tucked neatly under her cap, was filling in for a colleague. As she checked Eleanor's blood pressure, she paused, her gaze thoughtful. "You don't quite fit in here, do you, Eleanor?" she said softly, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. Eleanor looked up, startled. Chloe chuckled gently. "Don't get me wrong, a lot of folks here need a good deal of help, and that's perfectly all right. But you seem like you've still got plenty of spark." Eleanor blinked back the sudden sting of tears. It was the first time anyone had truly seen her since she'd arrived. They fell into conversation. Chloe asked about Michael, and Eleanor, carefully choosing her words, shared a fraction of her story, the raw hurt still too tender to fully expose. Chloe listened, not just with polite nods, but with genuine empathy. Later that afternoon, Chloe returned to Eleanor's room, a small, folded piece of paper in her hand. "This belonged to Mr. Henderson," she whispered, her voice hushed with respect. "He passed away last week." We found it tucked inside his prayer book. No one claimed it. She unfolded the paper to reveal a lottery ticket, slightly yellowed with age, the date stamped almost 2 weeks prior. Eleanor managed a dry, brittle chuckle. "And you think I should try my luck?" Chloe winked, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Well, Eleanor, the world owes you something, wouldn't you say?" Eleanor didn't intend to do it. Not at first. It felt utterly foolish, a silly notion in the face of her profound predicament. But the days in Oakwood stretched into an endless monotony, a suffocating blanket of boredom and despair. That evening, after the hallway lights had dimmed and the facility settled into its quiet routine, Eleanor, armed with a newfound sense of reckless abandon, made her way to the dusty, rarely used computer in the residence lounge. With trembling fingers, she typed in the numbers from the faded ticket. Her breath hitched. Her eyes scanned the screen again and again, refusing to believe what they were seeing. $1 million. She clapped a hand over her mouth, stifling a gasp. Her gaze darted around the empty lounge. No one. Just the hum of the ancient computer and the distant tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the hallway. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't joy that flooded her senses. Not at all. It was a raw, electric fear. If Michael found out, if anyone here found out. With a shaky hand, she printed the confirmation, folded it into a tiny square, and tucked it carefully inside her bra, a secret treasure held close to her heart. The next day, she discreetly pulled Chloe aside. "I need to speak to someone privately," she murmured, her voice low and urgent. "Someone legal." Chloe, bless her kind soul, didn't pry. She simply nodded. "I know just the person, Eleanor. A volunteer attorney, Mr. Davies. He comes by twice a month to help the residents with wills and such." The following Friday crawled by with excruciating slowness. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as she waited in the small, cluttered break room. Finally, a young man with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of quiet competence entered. "Eleanor?" he asked, extending a hand. "I'm Aaron Davies." They sat across from each other at the small, formica-topped table. Eleanor slid the crumpled lottery confirmation across to him and whispered, her voice barely audible. "Can you help me disappear?" Aaron's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't flinch. His gaze remained steady, assessing. "We'll need to move quickly," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. The next few hours were a blur of hushed conversations and hurried arrangements. Paperwork. Notarizations. Setting up a new, discreet bank account. A burner phone. A temporary mailing address at a postal box several towns away. Aaron contacted an independent financial advisor, a woman named Ms. Albright, who specialized in setting up blind trusts. Eleanor's name would be nowhere visible, shielded by layers of legal complexity. Michael would never see a cent of the money. Eleanor signed a new will, leaving everything to a reputable charity, the specifics to be disclosed later. Michael had already signed away her life once. She wouldn't let him do it again. On the night of her escape, Chloe hugged her tightly, her young arms surprisingly strong. "Don't forget us when you're free, Eleanor," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Eleanor couldn't cry. Not yet. A strange numbness had settled over her. She slipped away just before dawn, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit, borrowed from Agnes's meager wardrobe, carrying a small duffel bag containing only the bare essentials. They thought she was senile, broken, alone. But she was about to become a ghost with $1 million. Let them look for her. They'd never see her coming. The long bus ride out of upstate New York was a blur of gray landscapes and quiet introspection. Eleanor sat near the back, the hood of her borrowed raincoat pulled up, dark sunglasses shielding her eyes, clutching the duffel bag as if it held her very soul. In many ways, it did. She didn't have a precise destination in mind. All she knew was that she needed to get far enough away, to create a distance so vast that no one could find her. Not Michael, not his sharp-tongued wife, not the slick lawyers he'd likely already engaged. Erin had helped her purchase a small, unassuming cottage under the name of her new trust in the rural hills of Pennsylvania, a place off the beaten track but comfortably livable. No security cameras. No close neighbors. Just enough space between her and the life she was leaving behind. As the bus crossed the state line, Eleanor exhaled for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Freedom had a taste, and it wasn't sweet. It was metallic, like the lingering taste of fear and the faint echo of betrayal. The cottage was nothing fancy, a single-story brick structure with peeling paint and a crooked mailbox. But it had a working heater, clean running water, and most importantly, silence. Not the hushed, oppressive silence of Oakwood, surrounded by people who had, in their own ways, given up. This was a silence that allowed her to breathe, to think, to begin the slow, arduous process of piecing herself back together. The quiet solitude of the Pennsylvania cottage offered Eleanor a sanctuary, a stark contrast to the sterile confines of Oakwood. Days melted into a gentle rhythm of simple meals, quiet walks amidst the whispering trees, and long hours spent lost in the pages of well-loved books. Yet, beneath this veneer of tranquility, a steely resolve was hardening. The initial shock and hurt were slowly giving way to a quiet, simmering anger. She found herself constantly reaching for the burner phone, the lifeline Erin had provided, checking for any news, any whisper that might indicate Michael's next move. The silence from him was unsettling, a deceptive calm before what she instinctively knew would be a brewing storm. Driven by a need to understand, to unravel the tangled web of Michael's actions, Eleanor began to delve into the small collection of financial documents Erin had managed to retrieve before her abrupt departure from Sycamore Lane. These were mostly old tax returns and bank statements, things she'd routinely signed without a second thought, trusting her son implicitly. Now, under the harsh light of her newfound suspicion, they took on a sinister hue. There were inconsistencies, subtle at first, then more glaring. Unexplained withdrawals. Overdraft fees that Arthur would have never tolerated. A growing sense of unease settled in Eleanor's stomach, a cold premonition that something was terribly wrong. Then, a plain white envelope arrived in the mail, tucked amongst the local flyers and utility bills. The return address was simply a post office box in a nearby town. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of a loan document. Her signature, or what appeared to be it, sat beside Arthur's and Michael's. It was a personal loan, taken out years ago, bearing the logo of their longtime family bank. The notary stamp looked authentic. But Eleanor knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she had never signed that paper. Her hands trembled as she held the flimsy photocopy, the worn sofa suddenly feeling unsteady beneath her. The handwriting, mimicking her own down to the distinctive loop in the E of Eleanor, was too perfect, too practiced. Arthur, a man of meticulous honesty, would never have taken out a loan like this in secret. And Michael had never breathed a word of it. A wave of nausea washed over her. This wasn't just a son making a misguided decision. This felt like a deliberate act of deception. Driven by a gnawing need for answers, Eleanor retrieved the fireproof lockbox Erin had provided. Inside, nestled amongst the lottery ticket confirmation and the new will, was the older file folder. With trembling fingers, she sifted through the documents. And then she found them. 3 more loan applications, each bearing her forged signature. A cold, sickening realization slithered through her. Michael had been stealing from them, from her and Arthur, for years. It explained so much, the subtle tensions in their final years together, the way Arthur had become increasingly guarded about finances, the sudden tightening of their budget, Michael's constant emergencies that always required a cash infusion, yet he seemed to drive a newer car every year. The hushed arguments she'd overheard late at night, which she'd attributed to work stress or minor disagreements. The cancelled vacations. The bad investments. It had all been Michael. This time, the tears didn't come. Instead, a hard knot of resolve tightened in her chest. She opened her laptop, a device Erin had patiently shown her how to use, and began to dig deeper. Over the next 3 days, fueled by a potent mix of anger and a burning desire for the truth, Eleanor painstakingly pieced together the fragments of Michael's deceit. He had falsified multiple loan documents, using both her and Arthur's social security numbers. The amounts varied, some relatively small, others substantial, but they all painted a damning picture. It appeared that Arthur, in his quiet, stoic way, must have covered most of it before he passed, shielding Eleanor from the full extent of Michael's betrayal, perhaps out of shame or a misguided sense of protecting his son. But one account, a high-interest line of credit linked to a small antique business Eleanor had briefly co-owned with a friend decades ago, remained active. The balance had ballooned to an alarming sum, and it had defaulted just 3 months before Michael had deposited her at Oakwood. Sitting in the dim light of the Pennsylvania cottage, the laptop screen illuminating her determined face, Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theft. Fraud. Criminal. She reached for the burner phone and called Aaron. His calm, steady voice on the other end was a welcome anchor in the swirling chaos of her emotions. "Aaron," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I have new information. Forged documents. Loans. Michael did it." "I believe you, Eleanor," he replied without hesitation. "What do you want to do?" "Not yet," she said slowly, a plan beginning to form in her mind. "I'm not ready to press charges. Not yet. Not because I have any doubts. Those are long gone. I'm not ready because I want him to feel it first. The fear. The uncertainty. The not knowing. I want him to wonder if I know." Because the truth was, Eleanor wasn't hiding anymore. She was hunting. She began meticulously gathering every document she could find, every account tied to her name, every old email, every financial notice Michael had ever sent on her behalf. She even contacted their old bank, using a legal pretext Aaron had helped her craft, and requested years of archived records. Piece by painstaking piece, the puzzle formed, and what it revealed sent a fresh wave of cold fury through her veins. Michael had taken out a substantial high-interest loan against the long-dormant antique business, using the now-defunct LLC as collateral. He had signed Arthur's name, not just after his passing, but 2 years after. That wasn't just a moral failing, that was blatant federal fraud. Eleanor saved everything to an encrypted folder on her laptop, backed it up onto a secure drive, and printed a hard copy, which she carefully stored in the lockbox beneath the loose floorboard in the hallway closet. She wasn't sure how much time she had. If Michael was as desperate as she suspected, and if he had even the slightest inkling that she had vanished with a considerable sum of money, he would be coming for her. Had she ever truly known her son? The question echoed in the quiet cottage, a painful refrain. Scrolling through pages of damning documents, each one a testament to his long-standing deceit, Eleanor felt a profound sense of disconnect. The little boy she had cradled in her arms, the young man she had supported and believed in, had morphed into a stranger, and not just any stranger, a dangerous one. By now, the evidence was irrefutable. Michael had forged her signature, lied to banks, manipulated Arthur into covering his tracks, and worst of all, he had done it all behind the carefully constructed mask of a devoted son. But the darkest truth, the one that hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow, emerged from a simple search, buried in a public database, accessed with Aaron's assistance. Michael Taylor was currently under federal investigation for fraudulent tax filings, embezzlement, and identity misuse. Identity misuse. That phrase resonated with a chilling familiarity. Trembling, Eleanor clicked on the case file. The details were mostly redacted, but the accusations were clear. Michael had been creating false identities, inflating incomes, falsifying deductions, and submitting returns to siphon money through fraudulent refunds. Some of these identities belonged to deceased individuals, some to the elderly, and some, the sickening truth dawned on her, were real people, including her. The IRS had flagged several returns filed in her name over the past 3 years. She had been completely oblivious. Staring at the screen, her mind reeling, Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. Had he planned this all along? Was this the reason for his sudden urgency to place her in Oakwood and disconnect her phone? It wasn't concern. It was containment. He wanted her silent, disoriented, out of the way. Pushing back from the small desk, Eleanor paced the narrow living room, one hand pressed against her chest to quell the tremors. Her own son had weaponized her identity, used her name as a tool for his criminal schemes. And when the heat came down, he had planned to discard her like a loose end in a messy story. But now, Eleanor realized with a surge of grim determination, she wasn't just a loose end. She was the one holding the thread. She didn't call the police. Not yet. Instead, she began meticulously documenting everything. Every lie. Every loan. Every forged line on a piece of paper. She printed them, filed them in manila folders, labeled them with dates. She began recording audio notes on the burner phone, not because she was afraid of forgetting, but because she wanted her voice to be the last one in the room if anything happened to her. Then, she made a choice. She mailed a complete copy of her meticulously compiled file anonymously to the Department of Justice. Not to make a public statement, not yet, but to plant a seed. They would have the evidence if anything untoward happened to her. They would know where to look. Still, a persistent feeling of being watched lingered. She started noticing cars parked for longer than usual down the lane. Once, a man knocked on the door, claiming to be conducting a neighborhood survey. Eleanor didn't open it, watching him through the curtains, the burner phone clutched tightly in her hand. Every unexpected sound made her jump. And still, she didn't run. Not this time. She made another call to Aaron. "We need to finalize the trust," she told him, her voice firm. "And the will. I want everything protected." He agreed. They set it all up under her new trust name, with layers of legal insulation. If Michael ever tried to claim a cent of her newfound wealth, he would be bounced out of every courtroom in the country. But as much as Eleanor tried to shield herself with legal documents and strategic planning, the emotional blow hit hardest in the quiet moments. She would sit by the window at night, the Pennsylvania darkness enveloping the cottage, and remember Michael as a boy. His infectious laugh, his scraped knees, the way he used to fall asleep on her chest. She'd remember the teenage years, when things became more challenging, but she had never given up on him. The late-night calls from college, the sudden silences, the growing distance. How had she missed it? How long had he been slipping away while she kept holding on? Perhaps, she mused sadly, that was the worst kind of betrayal, the one you watched unfold in slow motion, always hoping it was something else. But now she knew, and she wasn't going to let him rewrite the ending of her story. Because for the first time in her life, Eleanor held the pen. The letter arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address. But the moment Eleanor saw the sharp, slanted handwriting, she knew it was Michael. Even his penmanship seemed impatient, eager to be done. Inside was a single sentence. "I know what you did, and this isn't over." Eleanor read it twice, 3 times. Then, a hollow laugh escaped her lips. It was exactly the kind of arrogant, entitled response she had come to expect. "No, I miss you. No, where are you?" Just a warning. A threat. She folded the letter neatly and slid it into her growing folder of evidence. By now, she had been gone almost 3 weeks. Michael had launched what appeared to be a full-scale public campaign of concern, pleading for information about his missing mother, giving tearful interviews to local news stations, playing the role of the heartbroken son searching for his confused and vulnerable parent. It would have been comical if it weren't so chillingly manipulative. And then, just as Eleanor had feared, he made his move. A certified letter arrived from the county courthouse in Sycamore Lane. Her hands trembled as she signed for it and sat down at the small kitchen table to open it. Michael had filed a petition to have her declared mentally incapacitated. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The document included sworn statements from 2 individuals claiming she had exhibited erratic and confused behavior over the past year. One was a former neighbor she barely knew, the other an old college friend of Michael's she'd met perhaps twice. Michael's lawyer had even submitted audio clips, snippets of old voicemails Eleanor had left when she was feeling down, lonely, or simply venting, chopped and edited to make her sound unwell, unstable. He had even attached a letter from a psychiatrist Eleanor had never met, expressing concern over her disappearance and paranoid behavior. They wanted the court to freeze her accounts, seize control of her trust, drag her back to Sycamore Lane. The air felt punched from her lungs. That same night, Aaron arrived, his expression grim as he read through the legal documents. "We've got work to do, Eleanor," he said finally, his voice low and serious. "But you need to be calm. You need to stay sharp. They're counting on panic." Eleanor nodded, a cold numbness settling over her, beyond tears. The next few days moved like a gathering storm. Aaron contacted an experienced litigator, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies, no relation, as it turned out, to help them prepare their defense. They meticulously gathered documents, phone call logs, financial records, even a daily journal Eleanor had started keeping since leaving Oakwood, all to prove her clear state of mind. They scheduled an independent psychiatric evaluation with a doctor known for her integrity. Dr. Levine, a kind woman with a gentle demeanor, came to the cottage and spent 3 hours with Eleanor. She asked about her childhood, about Arthur, about Michael. Eleanor told her everything, holding nothing back. Dr. Levine didn't offer pity. She listened intently, asking insightful questions. When she left, she touched Eleanor's hand and said, "You are one of the most lucid and thoughtful people I've spoken with this week, Eleanor." It felt like the first real breath she had taken in days. Still, the pressure mounted. News of the upcoming hearing leaked. The local internet forums, which had briefly sympathized with Michael's missing mother saga, began to shift. Questions arose. Why hadn't Eleanor contacted anyone? Was she unstable? Was someone else pulling the strings? The media, as always, loved a mystery, and Michael knew exactly how to feed them one. But Eleanor wasn't afraid anymore. Because now, she had more than just proof. She had purpose. In the quiet of her small Pennsylvania home, she began preparing a video statement. She didn't publish it yet, but she wanted to be ready, just in case they managed to silence her. Looking directly into the camera, her gaze steady and resolute, Eleanor spoke. "My name is Eleanor Albright Taylor. I am of sound mind, and I was betrayed by the person I trusted most." She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply told the truth. Because she knew what was coming, and this time, she wouldn't be the one on trial. The courtroom in Sycamore Lane hadn't changed a whit since Eleanor had last set foot there, decades ago, accompanying Arthur for jury duty. The same worn wooden benches, the same slightly musty smell of old paper and solemnity. But Eleanor was a different woman now. The fear that had gnawed at her in Oakwood had been replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. Aaron had advised her to dress simply but with an air of quiet strength. A navy blue suit, Arthur's silver cufflinks, sensible heels that clicked with purpose on the polished floor. Michael was already seated at the plaintiff's table when Eleanor entered, his face a carefully constructed mask of concern, a performance he'd likely rehearsed countless times. He even offered a weak, tremulous smile, the kind that might sway a stranger but held no warmth for Eleanor. He was here to bury her reputation, to paint her as a confused old woman easily manipulated. The judge, a kindly but weary-looking man with silver temples, called the case. In the matter of Eleanor Albright Taylor's mental competency. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Michael's lawyer, a tall, impeccably dressed man with an air of practiced confidence, presented his case first. Eleanor had disappeared. Eleanor was exhibiting erratic behavior. Eleanor was likely being exploited. Eleanor was a danger to herself and her finances. He presented Dr. Albright's, the psychiatrist Eleanor had never met, letter and played the selectively edited audio clips, snippets of Eleanor's private moments twisted to sound like the ramblings of an unstable mind. Eleanor watched the judge's brow furrow slightly, her own hands clasped firmly in her lap. Then Michael spoke, his voice carefully modulated, laced with just the right amount of distress. "Your Honor," he began, his gaze fixed on the judge, avoiding Eleanor's. "I love my mother. I truly do. This is the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but I believe she is being taken advantage of. She isn't herself. She's lost. That was Eleanor's cue. Your Honor, she said, her voice clear and steady as she rose to her feet. The judge nodded, acknowledging her. Eleanor walked slowly to the stand, pausing just long enough for her presence to register in the hushed courtroom. My name is Eleanor Albright Taylor, she stated, her gaze direct and unwavering. I am 72 years old. I am not mentally impaired. I am not lost, and I am certainly not anyone's victim. Methodically, she opened her briefcase and handed a copy of Dr. Levine's comprehensive psychiatric evaluation to the judge. Signed, dated, and certified. The verdict: completely sound mind, no indicators of cognitive decline, emotionally stable. Eleanor watched Michael's lawyer's shoulders stiffen, the color drain slightly from Michael's face. I also have here, Eleanor continued, lifting a second, thicker file, a detailed log of every phone call I made the week before I left Oakwood, receipts for the transfer of funds to a legal trust, comprehensive medical records, and a signed affidavit from Mr. Davies, the attorney who assisted me, attesting to my lucidity, logical thinking, and full control over my decisions. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the tense courtroom. And I have something else, she added, her voice dropping slightly, but I won't be presenting that today. Not unless I absolutely have to. She didn't reveal the file containing the forged signatures, the stolen loans, the manipulated tax documents. That was her ace in the hole. Instead, she turned her attention back to the judge. Your Honor, my son placed me in an institution against my will, disconnected my phone, and stripped me of my freedom. And now, he seeks to take what little I have left. My voice, my independence, my very dignity. Please, don't let him. The courtroom remained silent, every eye fixed on Eleanor. Aaron sat beside her, a quiet pillar of support. The judge leaned back, tapping the file thoughtfully. Mrs. Taylor, he said after a long moment, based on the overwhelming evidence presented, your independent psychiatric evaluation, and the inconsistencies in the petitioner's claims, I am dismissing this case. Your financial accounts and personal autonomy are fully restored. This court recognizes you as competent and independent. A wave of relief washed over Eleanor, so profound it almost buckled her knees. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered her papers, but she walked out of the courtroom with her head held high. Michael didn't utter a word as she passed, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning fear. He knew, at least in this arena, it was over. But what he didn't know was that while he had spent weeks trying to prove she was unstable, Eleanor had been building something far more powerful than a defense, a legacy. And she wasn't finished yet. The call came late that night, Aaron's voice tight but steady. It's happened, Eleanor. The Department of Justice has opened formal proceedings. Michael's name is on the docket. Eleanor sat in the quiet of her Pennsylvania cottage, the moonlight casting long shadows across the room. A part of her had been expecting this moment, but now that it had arrived, it felt less like a victory and more like an inevitable consequence. The next morning, the world caught up. The local news ran the headline, "Son of recently spotlighted elder abuse case under federal investigation." Eleanor's name wasn't directly mentioned, but the connection was undeniable. People remembered the missing mother, the court battle, the anonymous donations that had suddenly begun appearing at local senior centers. Now, their seemingly devoted son was unraveling, and the public wanted to hear Eleanor's side of the story. For 2 days, Eleanor retreated into the quiet of her cottage, turning off the television, ignoring the persistent ringing of the burner phone. She cooked herself simple meals, watched the birds flit around the feeder Arthur had built, and sat with a pen and paper, writing letters she never intended to send, pouring out the years of unspoken emotions. But silence, she realized, wasn't true justice. It was time. She reached out to Sarah, the journalist Aaron had connected her with weeks earlier. "I'm ready to speak," she said, her voice firm. "This time, on camera. No aliases, no more shadows." The interview was scheduled for the following Friday, a national news feature. "Are you sure, Eleanor?" Sarah had asked, her voice laced with concern. "Never been more sure," Eleanor had replied. On the day of the interview, Eleanor dressed simply. A soft grey sweater, small pearl earrings, no makeup, no stylist. Just the unvarnished truth. They sat across from each other in a quiet studio, the lights soft and warm. Sarah leaned forward. Eleanor, the world knows the headlines. They've read about Michael, about the court case. But what they don't know is the heart of it. Why now? Eleanor looked directly into the camera, her gaze unwavering. Because it's not just about me, she said, her voice filled with quiet conviction. It's about every parent who gave everything and was then discarded. Every older adult dismissed, erased, or locked away under the guise of love. I was almost one of them, and I won't be silent anymore. And then, Eleanor told her story. Oakwood. The lottery ticket. The lies she had uncovered. The file she had sent to the Department of Justice. She held nothing back. Sarah's eyes welled with tears as Eleanor spoke, but Eleanor's own remained dry. She was done crying. That night, the interview aired. Millions watched. Messages poured in, emails, letters, social media comments. People from across the country sharing their own stories of betrayal, abandonment, and survival. Eleanor wasn't just Eleanor anymore. She was a mirror reflecting their own pain and resilience. Michael didn't speak publicly, but sources close to him reported he was devastated, his carefully constructed life crumbling around him. Good, Eleanor thought. He had built that life on manipulation, and now it was collapsing under the weight of his own cruelty. But Eleanor didn't gloat. Instead, she got to work. She finalized the paperwork for the Margaret Albright Taylor Foundation, a national organization dedicated to protecting elders from legal and financial abuse. They would hire attorneys, launch hotlines, build partnerships with senior care facilities and courts. If Michael was going to use her name to strip her of dignity, she was going to use it to give dignity back to others. Still, the ache lingered. Not because Michael was suffering the consequences of his actions, but because she had once loved him with a fierce, unwavering loyalty that had blinded her to the truth. Now she had to learn how to live without that illusion. But she had something better now. She had the truth, and no one could ever take that away from her again. Michael's arrest didn't come with flashing lights and sirens, but with stark headlines. Michael Taylor indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and tax evasion. Eleanor read the news on a quiet morning, sipping her tea, her small rescue cat, aptly named Justice, curled on the rug beside her. The cottage was still, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the rustling of leaves outside. For a long time, she simply stared at the article. Not because she didn't believe it, but because she had imagined this moment so many times that its arrival felt almost like déjà vu. He was out on bond, of course. Money could buy time, even if it couldn't buy peace. But the damage was done. His name had become synonymous with betrayal. Former business associates severed ties, his credit lines were frozen, friends vanished. Even his wife had issued a statement through her lawyer, announcing their impending divorce. He was alone. Eleanor should have felt triumphant, but instead, a profound hollowness settled within her. The thing about surviving betrayal, she had learned, was that it didn't leave you whole. It left you wiser, perhaps sharper, stronger even, but something soft, that blind trust, that unwavering belief in familial love, died within you. Eleanor didn't grieve that softness, she buried it. It was a crisp autumn Saturday when Eleanor ventured into the small town square for the first time since her interview aired. People recognized her. They didn't whisper or stare. They smiled. A woman, perhaps in her late 50s, touched her arm and said, "You gave my mother the courage to leave a bad situation. Thank you." A young man behind the pharmacy counter slipped a small, handwritten note into her prescription bag. "My grandpa says, you go, girl." Eleanor hadn't sought this attention, but it arrived gently, like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Aaron stopped by that afternoon. "They offered him a deal," he said quietly. 10 years if he pleads guilty. If not, it goes to trial. And him?" Eleanor asked, still finding it difficult to fully grasp the enormity of it all. He thinks he can outsmart the system, Aaron said, shaking his head. He's been pretending his whole life. Aaron hesitated. He still hasn't tried to contact you? Eleanor met his gaze indirectly. She had received something. A letter, unmarked envelope, slid under her front door one evening while she was in the kitchen. Inside, a photograph. It was from her 70th birthday, Eleanor in a bright yellow sweater, laughing, a smear of cake on her cheek. Michael stood beside her, holding the knife, laughing too. On the back, just one sentence in his familiar slanted handwriting. You always believed in me. I'm sorry that wasn't enough. Eleanor sat with that photo for hours, not crying, not raging, just remembering. Remembering the little boy who asked for one more bedtime story, the teenager who dented her car and cried when she didn't yell, the young man who hugged her a little tighter than usual the day Arthur died. They were all parts of him, and she had loved them all. But love, true love, demanded truth, and Michael had chosen lies. That night, Eleanor burned the photo in the fireplace. Not out of hate but out of release. She watched the flames curl around the paper, blacken the edges, erase the smiling faces. She didn't need a picture to remember. She needed peace, and she was finally, almost there. The morning Eleanor returned to Oakwood, now under new management, thanks in part to the publicity surrounding her case. The sky was a pale, soft gray, the kind that seemed to mute the world without hiding it. She stood outside the facility for a long moment, staring at the very place where she had been so carelessly discarded. The parking lot was quiet, the trees were bare, but something had shifted. The front doors opened, and Chloe stepped out before Eleanor could even knock. Her eyes widened in surprise. Eleanor. Oh my goodness, Eleanor. Eleanor smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. It's me, Chloe. They embraced, not politely, not briefly, but like two people who had both survived something significant. Chloe's arms were warm, and Eleanor realized how long it had been since she had felt truly safe in someone's embrace. Inside, the place felt different. The floors gleamed, the lighting was brighter, the communal lounge boasted new books, a better television, and the rich aroma of real coffee brewing in the corner. I heard what you did, Chloe said, leading Eleanor to a quiet bench in the hallway. The donations, the interviews. Eleanor, you changed everything. No, Eleanor corrected gently. We changed everything. I just stopped letting people decide who I was. They walked the halls together. Eleanor visited Agnes's old room, now a bright reading lounge. The staff looked up, some smiling, some stunned. A few residents recognized her, and Eleanor nodded to each of them. They weren't invisible anymore, and neither was she. That afternoon, Eleanor gave a speech in the newly refurbished activities room. Folding chairs were set up, and the staff had baked cookies. Chloe introduced her as if she were a celebrity, but Eleanor shook her head. I'm not here because I'm wealthy, she began, her voice clear and strong. And I'm not here because I was wronged. I'm here because I was silenced, and I know how many of you still feel that way. Every pair of eyes watched her, some glistening with tears. I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me a long time ago, she said. You are not a burden. You are not forgotten. And you are not finished. A soft applause rippled through the room, then grew louder. Eleanor smiled, feeling the weight of every lonely night she had ever endured now replaced by something warmer, something full of connection. When she returned to her peaceful cottage, Eleanor finalized the trust. The Margaret Albright Taylor Foundation would become a national organization, offering vital legal and financial advocacy for elders at risk of exploitation. They would hire dedicated attorneys, launch accessible hotlines, and build crucial partnerships with senior care facilities and the courts. Michael took the plea deal. 10 years. He tried to send another letter. Eleanor returned it, unopened. That chapter was closed. She spent the final days of the year writing letters to everyone who had helped her. Aaron, Chloe, even Dr. Levine. She thanked them not for saving her, but for standing beside her while she saved herself. And then, on the first snow of January, Eleanor did something she hadn't done in decades. She wrote a letter to herself. It was short, just 1 page. She read it aloud as she sat by the fireplace, Justice curled contentedly at her feet. Dear Eleanor, you weren't foolish. You weren't too trusting. You weren't weak. You were simply a woman who loved deeply. And when they tried to write you out of your own life, you picked up the pen and wrote the ending yourself. I am so proud of you. With love, yourself. Eleanor folded the letter, placed it in a small wooden box Arthur had carved for her years ago, and set it on the mantelpiece. She didn't need a legacy of money or revenge or even justice. She had something far greater: freedom. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor Albright Taylor was finally, completely free.